We are very pleased to have a very distinguished panel here for your noontime enjoyment. We are also very pleased to have a very talented journalist, David Goldberg, who is now has written extensively on growth and planning issues and is now the communications director for Smart Growth America. So to introduce the panel and the conversation ahead, please welcome David Goldberg.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Is this thing on? Well, I'm very pleased to be here, and gosh, I guess I should wax poetic again, like everyone else, about Portland and how wonderful it is. But the relentless sunshine has sort of got me down, so I'm ready to move on. I would be remiss if I didn't note that I'm actually right now the communications director for Transportation for America. I am on full-time assignment from Smart Growth America, which is one of the co-founding groups. How many of you are aware of Transportation for America? Thank you. Excellent. I'm very pleased to see that. Those of you who aren't, please go to t4america.org and sign up for our alerts. So I'm going to have to put on my glasses now because it occurs to me that I'm getting old and I'm actually going blind at the same time. So I meant to introduce Earl, and I have a long introduction for him. But ladies and gentlemen, the man who needs no introduction, the godfather of rail Volution, Mr. Earl Blumenauer. Our first also, our next distinguished panelist is John Porcari, John D. Porcari. He became Deputy Secretary of the DOT, that's for the United States of America. On June 1st, 2009, he's the DOT's Chief Operating Officer with responsibility for 10 modal administrations. Actually, if Transportation for America is successful, we're going to bring that down to 2, aviation and transit. And it's just a joke, highway people. And they have more than 55,000 employees across the country. Before becoming Deputy Secretary, he served 2 stints as Secretary of the Maryland DOT with a Republican in between. In that role, he oversaw transformation of the state's transportation capital program to be consistent with the principles of smart growth and made a plan to double transit ridership in the state by 2020. John Porcari. Ron Sims is the Deputy Secretary at HUD, Housing and Urban Development. He was confirmed unanimously on May 6, 2009. As the second most senior HUD official, he's responsible for managing the department's day-to-day operations, a nearly $40 billion annual operating budget, and the agency's 8,500 employees. He's got some catching up to do to the DOT. Sims was executive for King County, Washington, which includes Seattle and some other cities. Over 3 terms, he focused on integrating environmental, social equity, and public health policies, producing some groundbreaking work on climate change, healthcare reform, affordable housing, mass transit, environmental protection, land use, and social equity. His policies focused on stopping sprawl and resulted in 96% of new construction being focused in urban areas that were actually targeted for development. Mr. Ron Sims. Senator Jeff Merkley is the son of a millwright and the first in his family to attend college. His public service began as a 19-year-old intern with Senator Mark Hatfield. He was elected to that same seat in 2008. In the intervening years, he studied international relations at Stanford and at Princeton. He did stints in India and in Mexico, where he helped to build an environmental camp for Mexican kids. He also worked at the Pentagon and the Congressional Budget Office. In 1991, he returned to Oregon to lead Portland's Habitat for Humanity, and later served as president of the Oregon World Affairs Council. He won his first campaign for state representative in 1998 and went on to become speaker in 2007, and then senator, Senator Jeff Merkley. So I want to start off the conversation, and I do hope that it's a conversation, but I wanted to start off with a little bit of something for each of you. specifically for your, aimed at your bailiwick, as it were. And I wanted to start with you, Senator Merkley, because you're sitting there.
Okay.
And I'm curious because, you know, we see Earl at these things a lot, and we know much about what he thinks. But is Oregon really a place where, does everybody think like this? Or, you know, were you required to swear an oath to livability when you decided to run for office?
Well, let me just sum it up this way. My responsibility in the U.S. Senate on these issues is to take his, Congressman Blumenauer's bills and introduce them in the Senate and get them passed.
Good system. But I have to say you're violating that protocol, because one of your early moves was to introduce an Oil Independence Act, which very interestingly, it had what you would expect if you're going to try to achieve oil independence, which the goal was basically cutting out all but North American supply in a matter of 20 years, I think. And that obviously requires an awful lot of drilling. No, but that wasn't where you went. It requires an awful lot of conservation and shifting of use of the resource, and it includes several different approaches. But one of the interesting ones was transportation options and expanding the In fact, the write-up that we got from your staff on the bill has this language: too many families live in neighborhoods where they have little choice but to drive in order to get to work and run errands, requiring planning to focus on moving people rather than cars, and providing communities with a greater voice in how their infrastructure is planned will give more people better and cheaper options for getting around. Shifting 10 to 20% of freight from truck to train would also help, and smart traffic management, pay-as-you-drive insurance, and other incentives. This, to my knowledge, is the first time that approach has been included in what was intended as a comprehensive measure to address oil independence. Can you talk a little bit about where that came from and the impulse there, and what you hope it might be accomplished?
Sure, you bet. This really came about because of conversations about global warming and how we reduce the production of carbon dioxide. And certainly one key piece that can bring people together is to converse about the fact that we spend $1 billion a day on foreign oil, that is a national security challenge for America. It is certainly an economic problem. We'd create a lot more jobs spending that $1 billion a day here in the United States on renewable energy. And also, this is a great transition to talk about good stewardship of the planet, reducing carbon dioxide. And so when you start looking at those three key components, it's a natural entree from folks who might not initially be thinking about land use planning and zoning and modes of transportation and how you create bike paths and how you utilize streetcars. But it takes people from a dimension they can get their hands around, positioning ourselves in a smart energy sense for the next generation, and translates it to transportation options in our urban centers. And so it's a key component. It's a key component. And by the way, Gabe was talking about doing a little lobbying in D.C., and I just want to mention maybe a little lobbying here that we're hoping to see some USA-made streetcars when we go to D.C. next year.
So I'm going to jump to Deputy Secretary Porcari. So hearing the description of the Oil Independence Act suggests a radically different framing, if you will, for the next transportation authorization, and a different mission I would expect for the Department of Transportation than has traditionally been the case. And I'm wondering, as you sort of assume being the head of operations of this big unwieldy beast, what your early observations are as to how practical the things we talk about here are, and are you able to recast a bureaucracy of that size, and how much do you need us to be successful on the legislative side to be able to do that?
Well, first, what everyone's talking about here at Revolution is eminently practical. One of the great things that's happening is this is bottom up. The ideas, the energy, the actual changes are happening at the city and state level and bubbling up to the federal government, not the other way around. That's very healthy, I think. We have a departmental strategic plan where 2 of the 5 goals are livability and sustainability. I don't think anybody could have imagined those being goals for the department even a couple of years ago. And when we operationalize that, what that really means in practice is that we want a balanced transportation system, and we're explicitly saying that balance is different in different places. And guess what? It can best be determined at the local level where you have the intersection, the nexus of land use planning and transportation. And we're also explicitly saying that transportation is not a means, it's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. It's an enabler for communities to get where they want to be. That precise balance is determined locally. I would say if you look at the Recovery Act, and we're very proud of the Recovery Act, and we're very proud of those projects around the country. It's put a lot of Americans back to work, and these are projects that will be there a generation from now. If you look at some of the things that came out of the Recovery Act, we have a high-speed rail program. We're the last major country in the world to have a high-speed rail program. The president put $8 billion with a lot of support in there for it. We're on that journey. That is by itself going to be a major enabler for revitalization of our cities and towns across America. We have the Tiger Grant process where, as opposed to earmarks, a merit-based system is actually allowing for intermodal transportation projects to get funded. Things that you don't think about, but freight rail, for example, is one of them, where those trucks are going to be on the road in our communities if we don't find a better way to do it. So we're operationalizing those things right now. We're very optimistic about a surface transportation authorization bill that will really rethink what we do. Fewer programs, more latitude in return for performance measures. Because the other thing that the Recovery Act pioneered for us is transparency and accountability. You can see the projects, you can see the progress on them, you can see what you're getting for your hard-earned tax dollars. We want to make that the norm in what we do. Again, provide more transportation choices, but with that comes the collective responsibility we all have to make sure that we're meeting performance measures and showing the public what they're getting.
So you raised several issues that I want to come back to later when everybody's had a chance to sort of do their introductory comments. Clearly, high-speed rail is going to be a big, major challenge for implementation. The authorization, we obviously want to get into, I think, a little bit more discussion about some of the issues and challenges there. But Deputy Secretary Sims, I wanted to ask you, you are no stranger to tough stances. I am familiar with. I met you actually a few years ago with a group of Harvard Loeb Fellows that were in Seattle, sort of learning about some of the green initiatives there. And you were kind enough on a Saturday morning to come down and to meet with us. But you came in sort of rubbing your rear end, going, I have just announced that that I'm breaking with the establishment group that had come together behind a major transportation initiative. And you had broken with them on the grounds that this very carefully calibrated deal of highways and transit was actually too much highway, and it was too much against the climate change initiatives that everyone had grandly declared that they were behind, and for which there were many people who were not very happy with you about that. And they thought, well, it's going to be years and years before the transit initiative can come around. They put a transit-only initiative on the ballot, and it passed. So there's now this major light rail project under construction. So you did that in Seattle, so we're all waiting for your next trick at the federal level. You've inherited an agency that people often describe it in negative terms, as maybe having outlived its usefulness or being somewhat moribund. You've excited many of us with the sustainability initiative. And we've seen these kind of things happen, but how far can you really go with a bureaucracy like that? And you had 13 years in King County. No, you had 3 terms, so I don't remember how many. I can't do math. But you had a number of years there. How optimistic are you about being able to make HUD a relevant and important player?
Well, HUD has $40 billion in grants that it puts out every single year. And Secretary Donovan said in a meeting that all of that was sustainable, that's what we're going to commit to. And we don't have a problem with our employees on sustainability. If you're talking about how an organization functions, we don't have a sustainability issue. But let me kind of tell you where I think the complexities go. One of the things that when John was being confirmed and I were being confirmed was the meeting that we had, and it's a true story. John, I went out to see him, and you're not supposed to talk to each other until after you're confirmed. So I'm sorry, Senator, but we decided to talk to each other before confirmation.
Your secret's safe with all of us.
Not as a discourtesy to the Senate, but just to talk a little bit. And I said, John, can we be a partner? And John said no. And I was really shocked. I said, well, you know, HUD, and we need to have the built environment aligning with transportation. And he said, no. I said, what about a cooperative relationship? And he said, no partnership, no cooperation. And I was sitting there stunned. He says, we'll talk about co-conspirator. That works. And, and let me tell you what, it's been an immense challenge to get HUD, who speaks HUD language, to understand USDOT, which has USDOT language, and EPA that has EPA language. And for us to be able to say that we have far more in common than we have apart. So we have united in purpose by saying that the built environment, housing, and neighborhood development and community development cannot be done independently of transportation investments. And that was a huge change. And that clean air, clean water, and clean dirt, which is what EPA's responsibilities are, cannot be discussed or resolved without talking to USDOT and HUD about how we build, where we build, and where transportation fits in. And then we just recently had a meeting with USDA, who also now has joined our coalition on sustainability, and doing the same things. What are rural connections? What are the connections between our urban areas and our areas of agriculture? How do we get urban gardens? Where are our urban forests going to be? And so it's the cultural change that's occurred that's been the most significant thing. So it's never been the resistance as much as it's been people working as a team. But the grants that we've been announcing over the last several weeks, and some more to come, are all to us, to the average person, said it's got to be easy. It's got to be easy to do a grant where there is only one application for 2 agencies. That was the most attorneyed grant ever on this earth, because statutorily and regulations kept stepping in the way, so we had to work through those. So there's an immense cultural change going on in Washington, D.C., where now the Center for Disease Control, now I'll tell you what they're doing. We have said in HUD, and USDOT has taken the same position, that we can predict health outcomes by zip code. Very clear. The data is overwhelming on that. And that we often say to a person, you're obese, and that's why you're going to get a heart attack, and that's why you're going to die. But if you can talk about obesity until the cows come home, but if they're not in a walkable neighborhood, and they don't have access to public transportation, they're going to remain obese. And so what we're now doing is saying that our functions as people influencing and building housing, and USDOT, which is talking about where transportation systems are going to go, have to be done in the light of how do we resolve what we call disparate outcomes by zip code, where those investments can be made so that we can have a healthier community. Now, we look back then and have to reflect. For instance, we can say that the average TOD project is market rate. They have been. So we had to sit down with USDOT and say, how do we make TOD projects affordable? Because the only way that you can create affordable housing is to have specific intent. So USDOT had to change its rules, and we had to change our rules so that we could embed in transit-oriented development affordability principles, so that transit-oriented development and light rail systems and all that wouldn't be in the domain of the affluent, but could also be of benefit to people who are poor. That's where the social equity factors are. And so we've had to rethink, you know, we have people who say, why would we care if there's a trolley in the neighborhood? So we've had to say to our people, because trolleys are smart. And, you know, so when we have, people don't realize that HUD is the largest insurer of housing in the United States through FHA and through its multifamily projects, and that we make money when we do that. So we say, you know, you really want a lot of trolleys because HUD can really make a lot of money. So it is alignment of interest, but all of that's been a significant cultural challenge for us, and it will remain that. But I think we've been able to seep it in deep enough so that I think long after we're gone, and our goal is that long after we're gone, that what we are now beginning to see in regards to a fusion of interest between agencies will remain there. It's going to be in concrete. It'll be a way we do business. And as a result, I think we're going to see a significant change in how the country grows and how its cities grow and its metropolitan areas grow. So it's been a lot of fun. It's not dull at any time. But I think it's, you know, we were on the plane together, and one of the things that, you know, because I forget to say this, is that just as HUD and USDOT and EPA and now USDA are creating their programs and moving forward in more of a unified, fused effort, it's going to be important that proponents do the same thing. And that's where I think where we like coming to the Volution conference is because we think there has to be a lot of new partnerships established at the advocacy level and the nonprofit level and the lobbying effort. Because it's important, for instance, I would look and say that what you do is important to civil rights groups. It's important to environmental groups. It's important to those of us talking about how to end poverty, how to get access to jobs. If you look at how we wrote our grants, we expressed a pretty amazing transformation of how we looked at the country, because the president was a community organizer and could never understand why the government never talked to itself. So when we were all brought on board, he was really clear, you better start talking, because he wanted an absolutely new look, a new business model, a new way we would look at this country. But it requires a real change in what we call the collaborative process at the advocacy level. And I'll close on this. Harry Belafonte, who is, you know, was at the Congressional Black Caucus event, and I envied him because he looks like he's 30 years old, and he's handsome, and he's smart, but he was talking about the president, and he was saying wonderful things that the president has succeeded in doing, that he says, but he has failed on something. And so I said, you know, Harry Belafonte, we all love you, but you can't criticize the president at a Congressional Black Caucus gala. So the room just pauses and stops, and he says, the president can't make civic engagement work. You have to make civic engagement work. And what I would tell you is that all the things that you assume are going to be benefits, we can't make happen. You have to make it happen. So we hope that you organize yourself and form those collaborative entities, because otherwise this is going to be a quick dream. If you want it sustained, it's going to be up to all of you. Thank you.
And certainly one of the big challenges is that there's so many things that you can and are doing administratively, but there's underlying legislation that describes the universe of what's actually possible. And Congressman Blumenauer, one of the things that I think many of us appreciate about you is your willingness to take the long view and to plug away for quite some time and see incremental change and realize that at some point it tips. I can remember the debate that I moderated at a Volution right after the 9/11 attacks, where you were debating Wendell Cox. And at that point, it almost seemed like, you know, he was getting as much play or maybe more than some folks in the movement were getting and in the media. And one couldn't tell where things were headed. But you stood up there and you said, I promise you, this is the direction we're going in. We come back 10 years from now, we will have made continued progress on this path. And I think that's right, and it's been borne out. But we are at a moment in the legislatively where we're asked to make some big decisions with authorization coming up. And I wanted to read just a little section from, this is a piece that Christopher Lineberger Brookings and Patrick Doherty of the New America Foundation have written. That's going to be coming out in the Washington Monthly on Monday, and it's a very interesting piece. And they sum up with this point: the public has made its desire for transit-oriented growth quite clear, and governments at the local and metropolitan levels have begun to respond. At the federal level, however, the policy machinery remains on autopilot, supporting a sprawl-based growth model that is beyond broken. What we need to do should be obvious: replace old federal rules and incentives that hamper the market's ability to meet changing needs and preferences for housing with new ones that don't, thus helping to rejuvenate the American economy. The real lever of change is the upcoming transportation bill. But these new policies will have to be produced in a political environment that, unlike in post-war years, is hostile to government actions that add considerably to the federal deficit. And these rules need to be rewritten quickly. The economy needs a sustainable base from which to grow more quickly now. The fundamental point being that real estate development has been a huge piece of the economy that has been all about the sprawl model, and there's a real opportunity with changing demographics and cultural interests, et cetera, in this new model of development. But the federal government stands in the way, and the prospects for change seem difficult at this moment. What do we have to look forward to, do you think, and how are things going to play out, or what are some possibilities that you see?
Well, one of the reasons I'm optimistic, what you just heard, we have, with Ron Sims, John Porcari, we have two people who come to the federal government with an understanding from real-life experience at the state and local level of how these things work, and they carry that through, not to try and somehow sidestep the real problems, but understand the power of the tools that they have. And coupled with their partners, I mean, Sean Donovan came to Portland, didn't want any press. He wanted to kick the tires himself. Spent a morning talking to people, looking at it, asking probing questions to understand what could happen with the department. Ray LaHood is, I think, the best Secretary of Transportation I've ever worked with, and somebody with an unbridled enthusiasm for trying to make things work. His candor, talking about they were going to provide some balance, that not that they're going to tip it, against the automobile, but they're going to recognize that people walk and bike and take transit, and that it was going to be given some attention. When you have people like those four who are in positions of significant responsibility, they are willing to harness the tools that we've got with an administration that took the Recovery Act and did some things that are truly transformational. If you would take the elements that are in there and break them out for energy, for research, for infrastructure investment, for higher speed rail, it is truly transformational based on what I have seen in the 15 years I've been in Congress. The administration has approved over $1/3 of $1 billion in 12 projects this year that are essentially streetcar projects. It's remarkable that this is moving out around the country. And those are just a few examples. Now, ironically, the gridlock, and Senator Merkley and I have talked a little bit about this. I mean, it's extraordinarily frustrating for him as a person who went to the Senate to legislate and who had a history of somebody who could work on a bipartisan basis and get things done, to watch the collapse this last Congress. But we're going to do our best moving a number of these things through. But the fact is that if gridlock actually provides more tools for the administration, a continuing resolution gives them more running room, and I think people will understand that. Finally, the federal government, and one of the things we have talked about from the get-go, is that the federal government, as the largest landowner, landlord, employer, has tremendous power just implementing what our friend Bob Peck has as Commissioner of Public Buildings, with $5.2 billion to spend to green facilities across the country, the 360 million square feet that he's responsible for. This can have a transformational effect. So from my vantage point, there is movement in terms of policy. You know, we've watched people from the dark side try and get rid of enhancements, for instance, and they got slapped back. We will ultimately have a reauthorization, and it will be a better bill, and it could be a very good bill. But what's happening in evidence around this room, what people are doing is driving the debate with an administration that's willing to meet them at least halfway. I am quite optimistic that we have enough tools to make a great deal of difference. You know, that think back to that debate with Wendell Cox. And you may recall at one point I heard him whining about Portland and bitching about this, and I asked him, well, Wendell, could you tell the people here, what are the 3 great America cities that you think are the models? And I'm not going to embarrass anybody by mentioning what he held up, and people kind of looked at each other, and even one of them that he mentioned has taken a decidedly different tack. The people who are on the other side basically have no agenda. Some of this Tea Party stuff, they're protesting taxation with representation.
Keep your government hands off my Medicare.
You are helping us chart a path that really is developing a momentum of its own because it works, because people like it, and we have administrative partners that I think are going to help us get a long way, even if we can't quite get what we want legislatively.
Well, Senator Merkley, do you have any, you know, is there any glimmer of hope legislatively on the Senate side?
Well, first of all, we need to have a big battle in January to change the rules of the Senate so we can have a standard course to proceed and not have everything gridlocked. I've heard Earl speak so many times about the Senate as the place where good House bills go to die. I'll do whatever I can to help change that. I did want to comment that it was terrific to have Secretary Donovan, Secretary LaHood, and Lisa Jackson testifying to the Senate Banking Committee about the Livable Communities Act, which is an act we then proceeded to pass out of that committee on a bipartisan basis. And the fact that they were there in that fashion, and why the Banking Committee? Well, the banking also has housing and transit. And so I'm pleased to be able to help push this vision for smart transportation, urban planning as a member of that committee. But including that Livable Communities Act, if we don't get it done outside of that framework, inside of the reauthorization makes sense. There's other bills that make sense to be included in that. A bill that I particularly like, not just for its great name, the ACT Act, Congressman Blumenauer's ACT Act, Active Transportation Bill, which I hope we can include, Safe Routes to School, which is tied into this, performance-based transportation planning, which is basically scenario-based planning. It's the old mode of thinking is congestion, add some more lanes of traffic. Much better to be able to test a regional network of transportation systems and find how they work together with goals you have laid out, either on, if you will, the community being bought into commute times, into pollution, into efficiency, setting those goals and then making the systems as a whole work toward those goals. And I think that that mode of thinking, that scenario-based planning, has taken root in a number of places in the country, and being able to promote that across the country and get it into that authorization bill would be a great step forward.
The prospects for the Livable Communities Act, in this session of Congress are probably not that great, but the President has put on the table a potential lame duck action on a $50 billion infrastructure initiative. Deputy Secretary Porcari, is there anything more you can tell us about the vision and the thinking behind that?
Well, what the President announced in Milwaukee on Labor Day is really important, because think of it as two parts. The President said we need a 6-year authorization so that we have the kind of consistency and predictability in a program, so that our state and local partners can go out there and with some level of confidence get out there and build the infrastructure we need. The President also said, given our economic realities and given how far behind we are on infrastructure, and if we're honest with ourselves and we look at what our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents did on infrastructure, we're living off of that today. That's our current economic prosperity. We're not doing the same for the next generation. So the $50 billion of front-loading of that reauthorization is an acknowledgement that we really need to get going. I would also point out that the President proposed a bill that was fully paid for by closing tax loopholes. It's an acknowledgement that we need to get the country moving again. Infrastructure is one of the best ways to do it. And we are hard at work with our legislative partners internally and with a number of others in putting the meat on those on that outline. I'd also point out a couple of other aspects of it that are really important to us going forward that may not be readily apparent to everyone. First, we all need to acknowledge that transportation is economic development. Now, it can be positive or not so positive, and some of the decisions we've made in the past have led to economic development patterns that have not served the country that well. What we're saying is there's a different way to do it. There's one component of that in particular that I got to see this morning here in Portland and with United Streetcar. And as we look at different transit options, and as streetcars in particular, as Congressman Blumenauer noted, and as he has helped lead throughout this, are springing up almost spontaneously around the country as a great transportation alternative. Make no mistake about it, we're going to use that as an economic development opportunity, and by that I mean we are insistent that this is going to be a Buy America opportunity. These dollars are actually going to stay in America. This is not about getting final assembly jobs that come and go with each order. This is about capturing the entire value chain so that in all 50 states throughout the country, the kind of transit manufacturing from streetcars to subway will be there. There's a couple of ways we're doing that. One is this is kind of common sense writ large, but we are not going to make the mistake that we did as a nation with subways and then with light rail, where every transit property gets their own, orders their own rolling stock and is different than everybody else's. And you pay more to buy it, you pay more for parts, you pay more for midlife overhaul. We think the right way to do this is to have common design standards and let as many American manufacturers as possible compete for every single part, every wheel bearing on that. So I want you to know that as we move forward here, we're very focused on the economic development part of it. We're going to keep those dollars in America, and we can literally rebuild an industry that employed generations of Americans before us.
There was Chandra Brown, who was with the United Streetcar. I was actually on a call yesterday for the release of the Apollo Alliance, a very interesting study on the transit, the potential for a transit manufacturing industry. If you all get a chance to see it, the Apollo Alliance piece, it's really quite interesting. I'm tempted to ask you more about this closing the tax loopholes and how we're going to fund this bill, but I suspect you may not be able to answer that. But can you say anything more about it?
What the President proposed as a starting point for discussions with the Congress are oil and gas loopholes being closed. There's a lot of ways to get to the number that we need to do. I think the important part is the bottom line is the President said that a 6-year ramped up, larger authorization bill with a front loading of investment that gets people back to work and maintains that employment is the way to go. On how we get there, there's a lot of different ways to connect the dots, and again, those are some of the discussions that are going on right now.
So we will see something shortly after the election, I suppose?
Let me put it this way. Obviously, this would work with Congress. It is something that we're prepared to do at any time, and we're anxious to do. And you're seeing something very interesting from President Obama. Transportation and infrastructure in general is a front burner issue, not on the back burner like it has been for a very long time, because he sees and the administration sees the direct link between these investments and our future economic prosperity. The point is, we need to be transparent about how we make those investments. We need to do it right. We need to measure that performance so that people can have confidence in it. And we need to do it in a collaborative way that meets whatever that transportation balance is at the local level. You put that together, and I think you understand where we're going.
Just to frame it with numbers, I mean, the President has suggested that for a variety of reasons that it is not necessary to extend expiring tax provisions that would provide about $700 billion over the next 10 years to the top 2% of American households. In order to deal meaningfully with the reauthorization, it would require less than a third of that amount of money that some people are willing to extend in its entirety. There is a lot at play going into the next few months with these expiring provisions, trillions of dollars, and the notion of being able to find $50 billion, for instance, that the President was talking about, or to capitalize an infrastructure bank, or to be able to make up this gap that will in turn put hundreds of thousands of people to work and revitalize neighborhoods. This is within the realm of the possibility, and these are provisions that, unless some sort of political consensus is developed, are all going to expire. So there is reverse leverage here that we haven't had in my tenure in Congress. So things can happen.
Well, yeah, they can. And I always appreciate the long view and the possibilities that you're able to see with your long experience. But I wonder how all of you react to something that you may know. Ken Orsky, who puts out a transportation newsletter to very wide circulation to folks. And his most recent commentary was quite dismal. He's looking at pulling together various threads, and he's saying that most congressional lawmakers do not perceive infrastructure as an urgent priority. They see no signs of a popular outcry about the stalled transportation reauthorization, nor do they perceive a groundswell of grassroots support for massive transportation investments. Indeed, what the lawmakers see is the opposite. They see New Jersey voters approving Governor Chris Christie's decision to cancel work on the long-planned tunnel under the Hudson River. Their reluctance to spend more money on public works also has been fueled by what they see as disappointing results from the stimulus initiative. And the President probably didn't help by saying that, well, really there's no such thing as a shovel-ready project. The expansive federal aid surface transportation program, as we have known it in the past, may no longer be thought politically acceptable or fiscally affordable. Any of you care to jump in on that?
I think Ken is just wrong.
Wrong, yeah.
I mean,
Thank you.
what we find, and it's evidenced in this room. I mean, I would venture that we have represented here at least 50 communities where people have taken local initiatives for transit, for water, for open space, for housing. And what we have seen over the last 2 decades, that if people understand the vision and are given a chance to express themselves, that between 2/3 and 80% of these initiatives pass. And they're funded with local property taxes, local sales taxes. The key is being able to have the vision that people buy into, and being able to, for us to be able to teach people what it means and how to talk about it. And Ken is right, there aren't enough people in Congress who feel that sense of urgency, but that's where people like this in the room come in, being able to engage them, being able to show them. Some of you know I have a group of stakeholders that I meet with, about 250 periodically for our little prayer meetings. It ranges from the Sierra Club to the Garden Club. It's got the chamber and AAA and truckers and concrete people and bicyclists and architects. It's an amazing array of people for whom there is a consensus about moving forward and new revenues. We have, I think, emerging a sense of what needs to happen. I think we need to make it easier for the administration. I mean, all of us, in terms of making the case and moving it forward, having our local initiatives, bringing in the senators and the Congress people. I mean, there are staff members right now, and Senator Merkley is well aware, that are planning what these people are going to do on the President's Day break. What they're going to do when they get the senator or the congressperson back in the district for 2 solid weeks in the spring. Well, there are opportunities, I think, to visualize, to drive this, to engage. It's not very far to be able to make the leap. It's been done by people at the local level. I think we need to make it easier for the administration to go forward. And I think the proof that what Ken is talking about is just wrong is in this room.
I smiled at that quote because if he was in our agencies where we'll put out a small grant and we'll say, like, we have $150 million of grants and we get $2.5 billion in requests. On the Tiger grants coming out of USDOT, I mean, for a, and although I know that my friend John is going to do his magic in New Jersey, trust me, if you had that $3 billion and all of a sudden he said, well, okay, New Jersey doesn't want it, hands up, I mean, all over the country. So to say that people don't want infrastructure is, I mean, it may not be the infrastructure he wants, but trust me, throughout the rest of this country, the demand for infrastructure investment is extraordinary, and we don't have enough money to keep up with it. But it's extraordinary. So I totally disagree with what his position is. I don't go to, the one thing about, I love HUD. I love not being elected. I have a private life. I have a life. It's just a joke. Among electeds, we always say we never have any privacy. People, I know this is your private time, but we've overshared that for a long time. But when you go across the country, and I go in this job, I've been to 67 field and regional offices across the United States. I have yet to go into a congressional district where an infrastructure issue has not been brought to our attention. And that's how pervasive it is. So for anyone to say that there's no demand for infrastructure, that there are not members of Congress wanting infrastructure, that simply is a person who's got to be totally oblivious to the currents of the United States today.
I think, with all due respect to Ken, he's driving through the rearview mirror. By the way, I hope he's not compounding it by texting while he's doing that. But
Ken's not texting. I don't think he's texting.
He's accurately capturing the echo chamber that he's hearing. But I think you've heard from several of the people up here today that the leadership is actually at the local level, and a lot of it's in this room here today. And in transportation, to some extent, it's following that local leadership and being responsive to it. And the Tiger Grant process did one other thing for us. In addition to being a merit-based process, rather than earmarks, and being intermodal where we could fund the really difficult projects that don't get funded either way. It was direct communication between the mayors, the city councils, the county councils, and USDOT, and it was remarkably helpful in understanding what needs are, where people are going, and what the local issues are. So I think Ken probably did adequately capture part of what's going on inside the Beltway, but not what's going on in America.
And speaking of merit-based, what are the prospects in the next authorization to have highways be subject to the same merit-based considerations the transit projects are?
Let's start with a couple of basics. On the highway side, first of all, we'll have an increased emphasis on state of good repair. For all of our infrastructure, the first call on dollars should be maintaining what we have, whether it's bridges or roads or any other part of our transportation network. So more and more, as we get more transparent, as performance measures on things like state of good repair are put in place, you will see those dollars, both federal dollars and local dollars, going more and more towards maintaining what we have. I think that the flexibility part of it, balance, whatever you want to call it, is the key ingredient. And as you see in more and more areas in America, there simply is not a highway solution for what you want to do. This is not ideological. It's modally agnostic. There's simply no other way other than the rest of the transportation system to add capacity. Pedestrian, bicyclists, transit, and the like. We have a great opportunity to address that balance in a new authorization. It is one that I think that there's a very broad cross-section of support for. And it's a discussion we're very much looking forward to. There will always be a need for a strong highway system, and I don't think anybody's debating that. But think about America 25 years from now. 25 years from now, America will have 70 million more people. The vast majority of that 70 million new Americans are going to be in our existing urban areas. Think about congestion today, stir in 70 million people, and I think you understand why the balance has to be different.
Well, related to this, I'm proposing that all transportation projects have a global warming or greenhouse gas analysis as part of the basic planning, because how can you weigh different modes and different solutions if you don't have the basic information? And I think that's one piece where we sometimes look at it in transit, we don't look at it in highways, that I think would be quite useful.
Part of what I think Ken Orski was picking up on was a lot of the symbology that's out there. You know, the issues that get raised up as being the sort of the defining issues around a particular arena. And right now, the stimulus and its success or lack thereof, somehow the stimulus bill became an infrastructure bill, and the infrastructure bill became shovel-ready projects that weren't really shovel-ready. That's one thing that we're seeing and having to combat. The other is the high-profile nature of the high-speed rail endeavor, and while it has excited a lot of people, it's also invited a lot of criticism. And we now have we had a piece in the New York Times a little over a week ago from reporter Mike Cooper, who wrote about all the GOP candidates, several of whom were expected to win, who have declared that high-speed rail or even higher-speed rail is a boondoggle, and they're not, by God, they're not going to accept that money, a la Chris Christie. Is there a way forward for a national rail system if certain states are taking this posture?
Absolutely. High-speed rail, first of all, let's put it in context. We spent decades systematically dismantling what was a good high-speed passenger rail system. We also have the best freight rail system in the world that we don't want to jeopardize as part of this because goods movement drives the economy. So the problem statement, again, is 70 million more people in 25 years. high-speed rail, and it will be higher speed initially, is clearly an important part of the solution. Think about what the late 1950s looked like with the interstate system. Not all the lines were on the map. Certainly all the funding was not in place, but there was a larger national vision and a compelling national need. I think you have both of those in place on high-speed passenger rail right now with the President's vision of being able to reconnect America through that high-speed rail and the need to do this in logical stages. There's really interesting things going on around the country. The regions that are getting their act together are moving first. Think about California, for example. California's been at this over 10 years. California approved a bond issuance of over $10 billion for high-speed rail. California's the first out of the gate on true high-speed rail, and you will see some early facts on the ground in California and Florida. Other parts, the Midwest, for example, is further behind, but catching up quickly, and you have 7 states that are actually working together there. Here in the Pacific Northwest, great opportunities for high-speed rail, building on the existing Amtrak service. But again, remember, we've been systematically dismantling this, abandoning right-of-way, starving Amtrak. It is not going to turn around overnight, but I do think it's inexorable. It is going to happen. And if you look at the kind of service that's being proposed, it will be both very popular and used. Part of this also is we need to change the public discussion on this. Every part of the transportation system is subsidized. They're public goods. Some of these subsidies some of the subsidies are more apparent than others. That's the difference. And I think a true and honest intellectual discussion about this would talk about the actual subsidies in each of the transportation modes. On that basis, high-speed rail actually comes out very well.
Great. I hate to do this because I think this has been a great conversation, but they're asking me to wrap it up. So 30 seconds each, starting with Congressman.
We are the only major country in the world that doesn't have higher speed rail. 43% of our airplane trips are under 350 miles, which cannot be done profitably with $100 a barrel oil for fuel. I mean, things are going to change. And all we have to, I mean, if people don't want the money in the upper Midwest or in Florida, that's great. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we'd be able to take an extra $1 billion and show you what can be done with it. Somebody will take it. They won't have a problem spending the money.
The debate that nobody wants to have is, now in the Northwest is a prime example. You're not going to locate another airport in the Central Puget Sound region. And yet there's going to be phenomenal growth and phenomenal demand. I mean, it took 25 years for the Port of Seattle to get some expansion of SeaTac Airport. So as you have increased populations, you're going to have increased air traffic. Any of us who have seen FAA's radar screens, when you're looking at all the air traffic up there, really, I'd rather be in a train that moves very, very fast. And so I look and say, you know, it's how you frame the debate. I mean, somebody's got to start talking about what is, I think John is saying, what's the reality of 25 years from now? I mean, what is the reality? And the reality says we're not going to increase the congestion in our airspace. And then so how are you going to move between those cities, between Portland and Seattle, or between Portland and Vancouver, or between Eugene and Spokane? You're going to have a smarter option. And all I wish we would do sometime is sit down with pencil and paper and cost out a lot of this stuff, because I was always told that's what rational people did. And and nobody wants to talk about the numbers, because the numbers don't drive them to some of the outcomes they want. But we have to have a really rational discussion if we're going to be competitive for the rest of the century. Otherwise, we're going to find out 25 years from now, when my granddaughter is decided to get married. She's 7, so that'd be about the right age. And And she's going to look back and say the smartest generation in the history of the United States was unable to figure it out, and all of a sudden she's going to be in the most competitive world ever in world history, and not have the tools and the resources necessary for this country to compete. Shame on anybody who doesn't want to have that discussion right now. We know what we have to do. We just got to get up and get it done.
A last word of inspiration from Senator Merkley.
A proposed theme for next year's conference in D.C., fewer bullets, more bullet trains.
Hey!
Well, this has been an extraordinary privilege. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I feel extremely lucky to have been present for it. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Absolutely terrific presentation. Thank you all for being here, and thank you. Remember, the Portland session's at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Thanks.